The Alpine and the Nordid type revisited. This video does not really have a purpose. It's just information that I have, but do not know what to do with it. I will be rambling a short time over little information. Yeah. So what is this about? I'm probably not the last and first to notice that there's certain similarities in what people thought 100 years ago and what they do now, even if they claim to be completely different. Yes. If you see those two maps I show here, the lower one is I don't know who it was, but it doesn't really matter, is a map showing racial subtypes of Europe in a certain from I don't know 1930s, 40s, something like that. It's very broad and it's not that accurate probably, and we shouldn't think that it's an actual representation of what was there. It's just what types you can encounter there like that. And it somehow overlaps with the Y haplogroups. But back then you have phenotypes, or you have the racial types measured by skulls, if they are brachycephalic, mesocephalic, or dolichocephalic, what means if they have a long or broad, a short skull, what phenotype in hair color or something like that. So basically how they look like. You could measure it, you can see it, you can understand it. But nowadays it's more like the haplogroups have replaced it. And ironically, now it's something like haplotypes. I cannot measure it, I cannot prove it. I have to take more or less what the scientists give me. It has become a sort of type of magic, you can say. You have to bend the law to be correct these days, and we have no further proof. So it has become very abstract, but it ironically in the internet is handled a little bit like the proto version of it with the subtypes. So the question is, do they correlate somehow? Well, we can't prove it, but the maps correlate somehow. They're pretty similar. Of course, if you look of the lower one, it's pre-World War II, so there did a lot of movement happen. For example, you would expect the former Prussian places to be now ruled by dominant East Baltic types, and it shows there on the map with the R1A. We will ignore the X haplogroups from the female side because I don't have the time nor the interest in doing it. But if we say the Y haplotypes have a certain effect on the phenotype, or is a certain subbranch or branch or something like that, the female type would have an effect on it as well. So it will always be the combination. But in these, this is not really relevant for that what I have to say here. It's only R and I that are compared. So what is a phenotype or a subrace? It is definitely not environmental factors. Like if you're malnourished, or if you don't have enough protein, you tend to be shorter, or if you're too fat, you tend to be stockier. So short, fat people aren't a race in itself. So Alpine does not mean short, fat, and same as Dinaride does not mean ugly people, in that they are tall and have long noses and malformed faces. that are probably more there because of wrong breathing patterns and not enough chewing if they only drank milk or have milk primarily and not really they lived in a climate where there's a very fast change between warm and cold, so your nose get to be blocked, what means you can't breathe properly. So these types would stop that phenotypic extreme if they would move somewhere else. Yeah. Also, if people have tend to something certain things like being domesticated, I don't know if they have peasant stock, they're more short and bulky and they are better to farming because they come out of a region where they have never seen fish or something like that. As you can see in the second map, the Nordic type in red is always in the coastal areas, never in the continental, in the areas where there isn't an ocean. There's probably the Alpine or the Baltic, and on the coast there's basically everyone else. So you can say it is a problem with protein, how much protein you get. So if you have more protein or a healthier diet, you probably turn to a Nordic or to a Mediterranean like that, what would be not very good for a stable type or description. So if we want to have a stable type, they have to be excluded from these factors. And there always be wild examples. So height can be correlated, but it doesn't have to be. There's also high people of something like an Alpine type. There would be tall people. Like there's I don't know, Chinese people that are 2 meters high, and generally they're not 2 meters. I guess I have to put a few disclaimers here. Don't take these for dogma. It's just fun a little bit. It's like if you take everything for dogma. 5,000 years ago in Egypt, the world was flat. Now it's round. Some people think it's flat again, but basically it's just a thought. So you don't have to take it seriously. It's about general stuff and general tendencies. So it's not one individual that we pick out. It's a general scheme or a general thing that happens that we call a racial type or a haplotype or something like that. So yes, there always be tall people and short people, and there will always be short people in a population of tall people. For example, if we only again take Chinese national basketball team and from them conclude that every Chinese man is 2 meter big, it wouldn't make tendential a very sense in anything, or it isn't very logical at all. And for example, if one type, we say it, let's say now Y, the I haplotype has yet something like a tall gene, like 80% of them are tall, 20% aren't, and the R gene, there's only 20% that are tall, but there's 80% in the population, the ratio would be 80% R and 20% I. It still would mean that there's more tall R people than I people, so it's all relative in relation. The same is for the maps that will be coming, and I will show that I have taken from the internet like a pirate. They're also relative to population. For example, if someone in the Dinaric Alps is of the haplogroup 1-2, but they only live 500,000 men, and then in North Germany there's 10 million men, but only 20% is of the haplogroup type E2, there will be more people in North Germany that have the haplogroup I2. So it skews relatively to what is dominant and what is not, and how many of there are, and how many of them are not. So you find probably more I2 types in Ukraine than in Croatia, just from the mass of people that are living there. And then there's the problem that the maps aren't really accurate at all, or the data that we have. If you would really try to do it, you have to, how to say, test everyone and do the World War II type style and go to every village and measure everything and take a DNA test and make photos and then compare them and make data that works. And if we don't have that, it's just hocus pocus fun. It's just not really taken to be seriously, and that will probably not happen because of the cultural climate of today, and let's be honest, who wants to pay for all of that? So I assume that there will be tendencies of certain types, and if you leave them long enough alone, they will revert to these types. These types, you can see them in physical shape, but the more important stuff will be the mental one. So how they act, what they are drawn to, and what their spiritual qualities are in that sense. So we have to assume that we have to take the quantity out of it and focus on the quality while having it in the broad scheme of things. So we have a typical idea of something, or we crystallize, we have something abstract from whom we try to synthesize something that we can work with. So looking at those two maps, you can see they somehow overlap with each other. Here you can see the main two Y haplogroups I'm focusing on, or what is focused on. The upper one is the R1 and the lower one is the I. What we can see here in the patterns is that the haplogroup R are dominant in regions that are more suited for agriculture compared to the Y ones. They're in the more developed areas. They're in the areas with bigger population density, and they will conclude from there that they build the big civilizations and industry, and they have a lot more quantity and mass than the I haplogroup. The haplogroup I is in regions that are not really suited for agriculture, wider regions where they're dominant. They're in less developed areas, as you can see in Scandinavia and in the Dinaric Alps or the Carpathians. So they're in rough areas where you have to hunt the fish to be pastoral, and less in regions where you can actually practice proper agriculture. You have the outlier in Sardinia, so there will be the outlier, but in this case it will be island dwarfism, and islands are always a little bit special. There always be things there will be different. For example, you have in Crete, you have dwarf elephants one time, and elephants are everything but dwarf in normal circumstances. So it has a lower population density. I conclude from there they are more individualistic, or they are more wider areas, or more like a frontier spirit. They're probably, if that's the case, they can't build as large culture or civilization, and they will probably destroy more and have less mass in general. So the R is more of the civilization type, and the I is more of a barbaric type, you can say. And it's generally assumed that the Y is taller on average, and the R is stockier, because the I haplogroup is correlated with areas of big height, like Scandinavia or the Dinaric Alps, but as said, the Sardinian outlier is also there. The Alpine I will should have said it in the beginning, I will use, because we have something pretty abstract and fictional. I just used the Robert E. Howard depiction of his Hyborian age with his peoples, because I think they're pretty accurate in what cultural areas he describes. So I will take R for the Hyborian subraces and I for the Atlantean ones. The Hyborians can be divided in two further parts. R1A, the East Baltic, what is mostly associated with the Slavic type, short, stocky, that kind of thing. And the R1B is Ostisch-Westisch, the Alpine type generally, but also like a Mediterranean type that is more robust. So they're the most dominant groups in Europe, and you can say even the world, because of the colonial empires. They're spread wide and far, and they're, as my thesis, they just outbreed everyone. So they're just, you may conquer them, but they take you out in the long run. Then we have the Atlanteans. Even though there are less of them, they're more divided, you can say. I don't know how far they are out of each other, and the R's were pretty simplified. So, but I take them like I have to, or I want to use them. The I1 is associated with Nordid. The E2A2 could be with the Phalid, and the E2B2 with the Dinaric. But as I said, there are environmental factors, and maybe the mix of these in the Balkan areas are also skewing the optic, or how to say. So let's put some things out in context. The Aryan invasion, that theory of the steppe people that conquered everything, I guess it's right. But it's a little bit a misnomer, because people think they just drink milk and run around with chariots. But if you break it down, it's more like a second Neolithic revolution. They were in the end out farming everyone else. Even if you conquer something, you have to hold it in the end, and they did exactly that. Then horses don't work really well in the European forests or in the mountain regions. So even if you have a horse, you have to conquer it on foot. And the nobility tends to slaughter itself after they have the land that they want, or they fight in wars. And if they take slaves and don't genocide the slaves, more or less, the slaves will be there no matter what, but the aristocracy will die off someday because they have too many bloody wars, or they lose one time. So they tend to not stay stable. The only stable thing is, you can say, the lower and the middle class, or the middle class in the context. So not the Jarl and not the Frau, but the Carl will strive in the long run. More like, you can see the aristocracy is more like lines. Think of the Merovingians, for example. The only thing stable they ever built was going to war, and they always kill themselves for the land that they have, like lions. And they ignored relatively everyone else because they had the rule over something. And even then, long term, they just got irrelevant or just lost their power after time. They did not make probably a lasting genetic impact. So the Aryan invasion is a little bit a misnomer because no matter who was on top of there, the warrior middle class, the Gaul, they survived, not the Jarl. The Gaul spread everywhere and conquered, and because also of modern industrialization, the middle or lower classes outbred them all, more or less. It means they're the long-term winner and the masses. Um, we could talk short about those Nordic invasion theories. Uh, I assume something of that is true as well. Similarly, I would say the Aryan and the Nordic invasion happened, but not really at the same time, or it's the same thing, or those things are 100% correct, just general tendencies. But the problem with the Nordic invasion is, if at all that happened, it was just cultural things. The noble classes don't start blowing fields if they won, and they either stand dying or they uh, live kneeling, and that's not an option for them. So they basically just died off if they lost. Just imagine Achilles, he doesn't blow a field. He does not build great structures or makes marble out of clay. He doesn't make great statues. Some people maybe make those great statues about him, but he doesn't swing a hammer and does that. Um, so they will in the end tend to die off if they lose, and something else will replace them, probably the mass of people from the warrior class. So even if they're culturally or superior in any way, in the end there's a certain slot of type of people that can live from other people or can parasitic to other people, aka the aristocracy, and they tend to die really fast if they lose, or it's the most destructive and violent and more high risk life you can live in these days. For example, Alexander the Great greatest conqueror that ever lived, conquered so much but had no lasting legacy, while the Romans, the most noble people, you can say, they had it more long lasting. So they had the empire. Alexander conquered, was the man, but the Romans had the empire and they had many people. And there also comes a wolf can live in a captivity, so those higher restless people will always strive for more, while the rest stays, and they will. Most people think of genius and think, oh, they have it easy or that works pretty well, but in the end, 99% of people that are like that fail miserably, and the 1% that get lucky get through with something. So the majority of cases you will fail. The majority of cases you will not conquer, you will probably die trying. So you have to take that in consideration always. So what we have here now is my thesis that they correlate somehow, but that there are general tendencies, or that are they can be showing with different population tendencies that are existing there. So it's not 100% barbarians versus civilization, because both groups can be very civilized and very barbaric in any shape or form. It will be just a different type of, how to say, tendencies, or a different role they can play in it. Because in the end, are the civilizations of the West or in Europe in general are a mix of those two in the dominant strains. They work together in the end, and that is what also worked. So there is no isolated group. There's just a group where the one dominates or is more than the other. There are two types of people that came in many shapes and shades and cultures and peoples and tribes and however you want to call it, or it is better to call it clans back then, or families that formed tribal confederation or clan federations that, or cities, however you want to call it, that made the world happen. So it's less structured. The idea of modern nation state wasn't there back then, really. It was more loose and chaotic in every shape or form. So first, let's make fun of the R1 Alpines, Hyborians, when you want to call them. They're kind of shown as, you can say, civilization, but they're also barbaric as well. If you think how they operated, or those majority of those people, they're like more, maybe like more brutalized peasantry, but there's less, not less warrior-like. You can say they're like sons of Thor. They're Carls or Thralls if they lose, but they can regain their Carl status. They're warrior peasants, so they can use the axe like they use the plow. You have to be like a warrior in antiquity or in the medieval time to survive somehow. If you want to be free, you have to fight, or you can't hold your freedom. They don't have this rapid outburst or extreme version, as they're less extreme in what they do. Their conquest will be slower, but they will be more lasting. You can say they eat their way through the enemy. They're farmers, so they will fight to occupy land, compared to the I1 that will more occupy to win glory and fame or tell a great story. And the other one probably do that as well, but the focus is more on gaining land. You can see if with the Romans or the Celts or something like that, they always fight to have a field somewhere or to make a living. They create long-lasting effects, like that they have these great cities or centers or farms. They're more collective, and they're probably more short-headed. So they're more tribal in the sense that they're more group-oriented, and they will work more on mass. What basically means they can create better, bigger societies. Better is relatively. Modern society is made by them and for them, basically. So you have the best time in modern society if you're part of that group. It doesn't matter if you go to the military, if you go to school, it's basically meant for them because they're the masses and they're the people that have to function or make everything function. They are those people that are the engineers or the great inventors of things, like even weapons or something like that. If you look at the most inventions where they come from, it's Celtic regions or something like that. They made better metals or better swords or something like that. Doesn't mean that the other one couldn't do that, but the inventions and something like that seem to come from them. What is contra to those what the people 100 years ago said, in my opinion. You might conquer them, but you will not outlast them. They will outlast you. You may win a lot of battles, but they in the end will win the war because they can kneel and come out stronger in the end. They're your typical Frankish peasants, Roman legionaries, Russian World War II cockroaches, average war crime enjoyer. They're your brutalized German peasantry. Or they're the people on the Great Track West in the USA that slowly but surely starts devouring the land or make it theirs. So you can conquer them, but the Hyborian holds the ground or holds the land. He's going nowhere. They're like the sons of the earth, and they will outlast every storm like the rocks from the land. And doesn't matter where they are, they're like crafty and start. They will plow a field without problems. If you read The Ancient City of Fustel de Coulanges, he talks about the culture that I would associate in the grand scheme with those people. So it's of the Milos, you can say, not the Equites in that sense. So they're very earthbound. They have a union with the land. And no matter who rules over them, they will outlast them in the long term, as long as they're not, you can say, genocided. Yes, they're warlike, but their expansion is very slow. So it's like more like the Aryan expansions and not rapid conquests. It's more like the US people, the Americans, slowly but surely moving westwards, while the conquistadors, for example, made it in 10, 20 years that they conquered an empire. So it doesn't really matter where they are, if they're in the steppe or something, they have the general tendencies of how they are, that they will just become like what they used to. So farmers and pretty warlike farmers. They're more robust, more stocky, more. They have more stamina, you can say. And in the end, they always will have the last laugh because they will the only one who's been standing. So I guess that's enough rambling about the Alpine type. Now let's come to the other one, the Nord or the Atlanteans, where we can joke differently that they're not really able to build big civilizations, but only as a parasite or as a leader. They basically need the other ones to have a lasting effect. They're the eternal barbarian, you can say. They're more like the sons of Tyr or Wotan. They're Khal or they're dead. Maybe they could be Jarls, but they basically suck at farming and they would make miserable trolls. You probably wouldn't want them as a fall. You would just probably want to kill them because that would be less of a hassle and less of a problem. So there will be more hunter-gatherers in or fishers or something like that, pastoralists, and of course also warriors, but they will be more loosely in how they live or how they were. In antiquity, people moved a lot because they have to give up their farm instead after a while because they didn't have enough yield from it. But those people are more like what Tacitus would describe or what Caesar would describe, that they live more of meat primarily and probably never started really farming. So those people would be always restless and reckless. They would be more interested in wandering and their fate and glory and something like that. The other one too, but in a different way. You would think less of they fight to have a home or to have a farm, but more to fight to rule over people or to have a great story or get plunder or something like that. So the focus would be a more hunter-gatherer one and less an agricultural one. They maybe want sheep or something to have their wealth or cattle, but it's not exactly that they are bound to the land. more moving, more freely, more individualistic, in more a loose formation, banding together if they have to fight someone, but then not really have a community or a looser one. They're more like the type of what you see the comitanenses of the migration era, the Germanic Männerbünde, you can say, but even those aren't limited to those type of people, but they will be probably more drawn to. So they're more rapid, expansionistic. They will burn as bright as fast as they burn, and while the Alpine one there will burn slower and don't burn you like that. You can have something like a civilization. Those people are more like capable of certain roles in civilization, but they don't have the groundwork, in my theory. Even though we may see ancient people as nuts or mad or war crazed, the Alpines would probably see the Nordids as nuts and crazy and more war crazed back then. Compare the Gaul to the Germanic, where on the barbarian scale, the Germanic is even worse than the Gaul. In how the Romans saw them, you can say. So those people are more like a one-trick pony. They're probably good at war and fighting and maybe philosophy or something like that, or finer arts like music and all of that kind of stuff, but they will not create lasting things. So they will have not those amount of engineers or something like that. They maybe can do it, but I don't think they have the natural tendency for that. They're less stable and think more about the moving world, where they go from one extreme to the other, what is pretty disadvantaged in the modern world. In the modern world, you probably want to be steady and don't do complicated, risky stuff. You basically want to be what typically society wants from you. Not do risky business and stay more or less where you are and do your thing. Yes. So the typical difference in warfare would be that of the Nordid being more like the individual fighter, the wolf warrior, berserk, something like that, something like more crazy, while the R-type would be also that, but they would be more stable, more orderly, or more in group thing. So more like the typical Roman versus barbarian, like that. But these are modern cultural depictions and not reality in the ancient world. So we have to never forget that, especially from this, we are projecting our view in the ancient world. So in ancient times, people that couldn't hold the line, or that weren't orderly enough in battle, they would be gone or wiped out. So this is not something that you have the luxury to do, it's something you have to do in the end. But even then, you can say it's that the knightly class or something like that has more similarities with the individual than, you can say, Nordid type, if that's, or the Atlantean, while the Hyborian is more grounded, or will, as I said again, have a long-lasting effect, more less reckless in all of this. So even if they're both there, the one will have a different type of tendency than the other. So in the end, the Hyborian wants a home or fights for his land. The Atlantean fights for glory, and the most important thing for him is death. So it's the hunt, what he's after. He's like the eternal hunter, while the Hyborian is the eternal farmer. Both have to be at war, both are warriors, but there's a different purpose or direction they're going. Compare the Iliad with Achilles as the one who seeks glory and death, and then someone like Odysseus, who in the end seeks his home and to return there and to conquer that. So the Odyssey is about conquering land, and the Iliad is about conquering eternity or glory or something like that. In the end, Odysseus will probably have a more long-lasting effect than Achilles when it comes to his genetic legacy. But that's also relative and pretty salop. I don't have the word at the moment. Pretty rudimentary, you can say, to claim that. So, as I said, there's not really a reason or a theme to compare the shorter, stockier Alpine type that are heavier boned farmer, warrior like that to a taller, more graceful Nordid that's is maybe a little bit fairer, but doesn't matter in that context anyway. It was about general tendencies where we can, if we take it like that, where we can understand or try to understand history in certain types of or how it worked back then, if that is real or something important at all. So it's more like fun or mental exercise and don't have to be taken seriously. In the end, they're both complementary. One needs another to be great. The other one needs that destabilizing factor that brings chaos or more flow, you can say, and the other one needs the stable one that gives him a ground and somewhere to stand from. So in the end, that is what worked, and what worked will come on top out in the end, no matter how. So without the Atlanteans, there may be no Roland or some hero stories or extreme conquest or something like that. But on the other hand, without the Alpines, we wouldn't have a long-lasting effect empire or something like that, and we wouldn't have the long lasting things like buildings or something like that. So it's more like in the artistic sense the difference between sudden explosion and long-lasting upbuilding or holding out or something. So it's something you need in the great civilization in both ways. If you only have one type, you might have the problem with if only there would be only Alpines that nothing really happens or they start stagnating, something like Eternal China or something like that. While if you only have the Y haplotype or the Atlanteans, they will probably never get anywhere. So they will probably just fight until the end of days, and until someone else comes that has more technology than them or that is just bigger than them, so they can play Eternal Barbarian again, but they will stay small, more or less, like those ancient tribes or Normans or Dacians or something like that, those Geats or Goths. They were always small and had pretty small crews, more or less. They fought on a small scale, but only if they came in contact with the Romans they could have grown bigger and did more or less. So maybe the Atlanteans need the Hyborians more than the other way around, but in the end they both were complementary, and they both were one of the pillars of which those things you call Western civilization has stand on.